The appendicular skeleton contains 126 bones divided into four major regions: the pectoral girdles, the upper limbs, the pelvic girdle, and the lower limbs. The upper limbs and the lower limbs have different functional demands in humans. The upper limbs are highly mobile and can be used for a variety of functions, while the lower limbs are built for weight bearing to support and carry the body's weight, in addition to moving the body. The pectoral girdle functions to attach the upper limbs to the sternum of the axial skeleton. It is highly mobile because it is not weight bearing in humans. Additionally, the pectoral girdle bones on the right side of the body are not physically connected to the pectoral girdle bones on the left side of the body, which means they can operate independently of one another. The pectoral girdle consists of two bones, the clavicle and the scapula. The clavicle is the anterior bone of the pectoral girdle. It functions as a strut or a brace between the scapula and the sternum, transmitting the forces that are experienced by the upper limbs to the sternum. Because of this function, the clavicle is commonly fractured during falls, as our first response to falling is to extend our upper limbs in order to break the fall. The force of that fall is then transmitted up to the clavicle. The clavicle also protects underlying nerves and blood vessels that pass around the shoulder joint. It is a long bone with two ends. The sternal end, as its name implies, connects to the sternum and forms a joint with the sternum, while the acromial end forms a joint with the scapula. Figure 8.3 examines the two ends of the clavicle. The sternal end towards the right side of the diagram is the blunted round end of the clavicle, while the acromial end on the left side is flattened and square in shape. The scapula is the posterior bone of the pectoral girdle. It forms the shoulder joint to connect the upper limb to the axial skeleton. The scapula is a triangular bone and connects with two bones in total. It joins with the humerus bone of the upper limb to form the shoulder joint, and it also connects to the clavicle as well. The vertebral or the medial border of the scapula faces towards the vertebral column, or is in closest proximity to the vertebral column, while the axillary or lateral border is in closest proximity to the shoulder joint. Follow the large spine on the posterior side of the scapula, and we will see that the spine eventually becomes the flattened acromion, and the acromion is what forms the joint with the acromial end of the clavicle. The glenoid cavity on the scapula connects to the humerus and forms the shoulder joint, and nearby a structure called the coracoid process functions as a site of shoulder muscle and arm muscle attachment. Figure 8.4 examines the anterior and posterior aspects of the scapula. From the anterior side, the coracoid process, which is an anterior projection, functions as a site of muscle attachment above the shoulder joint. The glenoid cavity, along with the rounded end of the humerus, forms the shoulder joint itself. The lateral or the axillary border is the border of the scapula that's closest in proximity to the axilla, or the axillary region and the shoulder joint, while the medial or vertebral border is closest in proximity to the vertebral column. On the posterior side, the spine of the scapula, which is a prominent ridge that runs along the posterior side, ends at the acromion, which forms the joint with the clavicle.